Thank you very much, Christiana, for the technical information. I am looking out for Dr. Jolene. Are you in the house? I don't know if this is Joy.
I've accepted her severally. It's like her connection. Okay, she's there.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Hi,
Joy,
everyone.
you're welcome. Welcome to the forum. So Joy will give us the general overview for the discussion on the relationship between logic and philosophy. Jolene did her PhD at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and presently she is a lecturer at the University of Zimbabwe. So Jolene, you just tell us about yourself, then your research, and you have 10 minutes to give an overview of the major discussion for today. And after that, we'll now take the next presenter. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to look at how harmonious monism helped to promote peaceful coexistence in African academic and social community. So basically, the focus of my presentation, it is based on idioma's harmonism, harmonious monism. And I believe that this can be of great assistance when we are dealing with gender issues, both in African culture and in philosophy. So first of all, I'll look at the key points in harmonious monism. I'll then move on to consider how gender issues, both in the academic area and in society, can best be dealt with from a harmonious monism perspective. So according to Ijeoma, harmonious monism is supported by what he called structural analogy and logical functionalism. And for him, structural analogy asserts that there is an analogy between structures of the prevalent ontology of any culture and the structures of the prevalent logic of the same culture. In other words, this he presupposes that he argues that logic presupposes reality. Okay. I don't know, maybe it's to do with my computer here, but my face is.
Yeah, bring down your video a little, bring down maybe your hand or your computer a little.
Okay,
Very
okay,
well.
okay.
And good.
Oh, okay, so that's fine. All right, so for idioma, logic presupposes reality and vice versa. So his structural analogy, which he believes guides harmonious monism, states that cultural items are understood from the structural relations of their fellow elements. So an analysis of the structures of cultural units provides insights into inner structures of people's thought. Reality for the Africans. Now we are looking at African ontology. Reality for the Africans, whether spiritual or physical, assumes a physical and spiritual characteristic. Therefore, realities relate to themselves in a manner that gives rise to fundamental or harmonious relationship. So the process of the relationship between and among realities in African worldview involves a dovetailing of realities into one another. Therefore, the maintenance of equilibrium in the universe. The African idea of reality is cyclic. The spiritual appears as the physical reality and goes back to the spiritual world, and the cycle continues. Therefore, the physical reality and the spiritual and the physical reality cycle continues. Therefore, the physical has an inbuilt spirituality and the spiritual has an inbuilt physicality. In other words, the two are in harmony. So he also elaborated on what he called, as he tried to build on his harmonious monism. He talked about occult phenomenon. He further explains the harmonious but dialectical relationship in African philosophy, that people of special initiation meet with spiritual agents for matters affecting their interests. This brings out the idea of duality and not dualism in African thought. And this is where the gist of my presentation is, because I'll be focusing on how dualism has perpetuated gender imbalances, especially in African culture as well as in African philosophy as a discipline. So the theory of duality, according to Ijeoma, states that all beings exist in a dual, interrelated fashion. The sensible are not wholly sensible. They exist as phenomena of visible and invisible realities, exercising logically contrary relationships. The African view of reality is summarized as the point of union between the physical and the spiritual. So in other words, the dichotomy that we have between the mind and body, the physical and the spiritual in the Western worldview, falls away as we look at Idioma's harmonious monism. Therefore, African worldview is that of extraordinary harmony. If this is the cross-section of Africa and the relationship its realities enjoy, we can attempt to go through personal reflection on this relationship. This type of reflection is the correct route to African philosophy. So this philosophical or logical route would mean for us as an individual, questioning, rethinking, and coordinating of the relationships in the worldview. Now, this would lead me to discussing the relationship that exists between men and women in African societies or in African cultures, as well as in the academic arena. So basically, I'm just trying to borrow from Ijeoma here. So I'm arguing that using harmonious monism, I challenge the perceived binaries between reason and emotion, which inform the purported binary opposites between women and men, both in society and in philosophy. So the difference between mind, body, objective or subjective, emotion, and reason has been gendered in philosophy. In Western philosophy, there has been a tradition of an aggressive comparison of reason and emotion. Hierarchically, reason has been ranked as superior than feelings. The implication of this has dire consequences, since groups of people, women included, are left out and seen as less capable. In Western cultures, women are seen as lower than men, impious, wicked existence was the cause of disaster. This, however, is not limited to Western cultures. Worldwide, there are some unreal and unjustified beliefs about women in many cultures and philosophies. So the question that I ask is, does this harsh treatment of women imply that there are rational differences between men and women? So tracing the arguments that viewed women as inferior to men, I've come to the realization that the underlying foundation of this belief is the dichotomies with which Anglophone philosophy defines itself. The definitions map neatly onto gender dichotomies: rational, emotional, objective, subjective, mind, and body, etc. In other words, reason and emotion are viewed as antithetical, reason being superior to emotion, viz. Men to women. Unlike the logics of the West, which does not allow extremes, that is materialism and spiritualism, to meet, it is therefore in African logic using harmonious monism, of course, that such is possible. In the African logic, none of the extremes superimposes itself on the other, since they are contraries and are always in harmony. Neither of the contraries is inferior nor superior to the other. The language of African logic is that of reciprocity of talent. The relationship between the physical and the spiritual, emotion and reason, women and men, ought not to speak of contradiction, but of contrariety. African science of the relationship accepts that everything in the world is a missing link, and the missing link is the contrary. When the missing links come together with the realities that are missing in them, a unity is formed. And therefore, I appeal to harmonious monism as a possible way to deal with gender issues in African philosophy, both in society and in the academic arena. I thank you.
Right, thank you so much, Dr. Joy Lin, for keeping to time and also for your overview. Joy Lin has given us an overview of the challenge of duality, relativity, and relativism and dualism in the idea of logic generally. We're going to take the next discussion, but before that, I also have to mention what she raised. She talked about the problem of antithesis between emotion and reason. She also raised a question about the problem of feeling. Is feeling superior to emotion? Is feeling not part of reason? She also talked of the problem of subjectivity and objectivity in logic and appealing to Chris Ijoma harmonious monism. May I also add that Ijoma is just left us within this period of the pandemic. He was one of the foundational fathers of the Conversational School of Philosophy. So that's why she was always appealing to Ijoma to find a way out of the problem between reason and emotion in philosophy. So we're going to invite Dr. Pius Musima from Cameroon. Pius Musima did his PhD in the Netherlands and then intercultural philosophy, and has since been working in the same field. The most interesting thing for us before considering Pius was that Pius tried to really, he's a post-Henry Oderuka philosopher who tried to move beyond Oruka to look at the challenges of discussion between different ontologies, different logic, and which bring us to the idea of polylogism generally in today's discussion. So over to you, Dr. Pius Musima. Pius, your mic is unmute your mic, please. Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much, Victor. Thank you, Christiana, and all the participants in this logic seminar. My brief presentation will be on African logic as an exercise in intercultural philosophy. I must say I am humbled and happy to speak on this CSP conversation on the UNESCO World Logic Day 2020 with the theme Logic, Knowledge, and Perspectives. It is a good theme because one of those characteristics that define humankind is the fact that man, is a logical animal. Man is a rational animal. And so when UNESCO decides to organize such a day, it means that it wants to help us look at this dynamism, to look at this conceptual significance and the relevance of logic in day-to-day lives. And so when there is such a day, we have to look at how the public understands logic and the various implications for science, technology, and innovation. But my own logic from an intercultural perspective, because I asked this fundamental question, but what kind of logic is UNESCO and the authorities trying to endorse? I say so because we have had this dominance of Western logic. We have had this dominance of Western models, of Western modes of thought. And if we don't take it seriously in this age of globalization and interconnectedness, we shall have lots of problems. And so when UNESCO brings up such a day, I trust my friends and colleagues of the Conversational School of Philosophy, my friend Jonathan Chimakona, Victor Mweke, Ada Gada, Sister Christina, and all of us in this program. I know you shall always engage in a conversation. And so my own viewpoint is that this conversation must continue, because if it doesn't continue, we shall get it all wrong. First of all, what is this Western developed logic? What is this UNESCO articulation of logic based on? I must say that this articulation is based on the Eurocentric claims of Western knowledge, Western connaissance, Western savoir-faire, and this is all steeped in racism and cultural prejudices. You all know that philosophers like Hegel, like Rousseau, like Kant, like Hume have what they have said about Africa, that Africa cannot have its own philosophy, Africa has no history, Africans are sub-persons, Africans are substandard, etc. And so to find a philosophy among non-Western peoples, especially Africans, is going to be a problem. So all of these orientations constructed Africans and non-Western cultures as the order. Now, let me take just this example of Lucien Lévy-Bruhl, the French Belgian anthropologist, who wrote this book, Primitive Mentality. He says Africans are primitive, they are savage, and they are pre-logical, meaning that Africans, believe in a world of the invisible and supernatural forces. In another book, he talks of how natives think. But I prefer to give this book, the title of this book in French, because it brings out clearly my conception of what my paper is all about. The title is Les fonctions mentales dans les sociétés inférieures. Société inférieure means inferior societies. So UNESCO cannot be constructing a day like this, and not giving those inferior societies a say. And that is why I want to highlight the fact that logic is something universal and must not depend just on the Western construct of it. Because when you say the Negro people are primitive, they had no brain for logical exercises, it's going to be a major problem. Secondly, this orientation given by UNESCO as far as logic is concerned is not just steeped in racism and Eurocentrism, but it's also based on Western hegemony. And this hegemony, as we all know, greatly endorsed slavery and colonialism. And so that is the way the West has articulated Africa. And so we talk of a world logic day, we understand is going to be from a purely Western perspective. We are not saying that Africans have not tried to respond to this, but the initial responses have been interesting. For example, early thinkers in Africa like Leopold Sédar Senghor tried to articulate an African logic, but this logic was based on difference in the West. This logic was not, claiming. Hello?
He's not
Sorry?
but seeing.
Victor? Hello?
Continue. I just
Hello?
the person off. Continue.
Sister?
Continue. Somebody was you on, and it was giving problems.
Okay, so Okay, so I was saying that besides racism, sister, are you getting me now? Okay,
Go on.
okay, okay. So besides racism, this conception of logic was based on Western hegemony, and we all know racism greatly endorsed slavery and colonialism. And so the early African thinkers who tried to postulate that there is an African logic, we can cite Leopold Sedar Senghor, who tried to maintain this difference between the Western conception of logic and the African conception of logic. And according to Senghor, he claimed, in the West, you find reason. In Africa, you find emotion. Oh, come on. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello, I can hear you.
Okay, can I move on? Can I write on?
Yeah.
Okay, so like I was mentioning, Senghor was one of the first to give this difference, this situating himself in this African difference with the West, when he claimed the West are rational and the African essence is emotional. And so this gave logic a certain culture-bound orientation. It was just briefly, talking about African difference. And if we situate this discourse within the debate between the universalists and particularists, you realize that the universalists did not think that Africans could have a kind of logic of their own. And so here, there was this tension between the universalists and the particularists, that there is not like an African logic. But not to waste time, I think in this third section, I will focus on, alternative logics, which are found, in the traditional African worldview. And I will begin here with our late Professor Farah Hebga, who castigates, this Western conception of logic as this two-value system, which is just essentially Western and does not have any place in Africa. But much recently, my good friend Professor Jonathan Chimakonam, has come up with Ezumezu logic, a kind of logic which is based on the African thought system. And like the first speaker was talking about, Chrissy Joma, Uduma Orji, Innocent Asuzu, Victor Nweke, Mesembe Edet, Ada Agada, they all subscribe into this school. And what is the main, or what is their main idea? The idea is that if we get into our African traditional systems, if we get into our belief systems, into our worldviews, we can be able to build up a system, we can be able to build up an articulate system that can contribute, that can cross-fertilize with other globally available traditions of thought. And so I'm sure Jonathan will take his time and expose to us much about Ezumezu logic, which is gaining a lot of grounds as far as African philosophy is concerned. And the main point, or the main issue that Jonathan and the rest are, postulating here is that, we can find, these alternative logic systems in our traditions. And so what is the way forward? Recently, we have tried to develop in our studies intercultural philosophy. We have tried to try to argue that there are philosophical traditions found across the globe, across the world, in different areas of the world, and Africa is not left out, and that there is an African logic. So how can we find these logics? How can we bring them to the fore so that they can contribute to global systems of thought? The first thing Jonathan has done and other colleagues are doing out there at the Conversational School of Philosophy is all about deconstruction. The first thing is deconstruction and endorsing the reader's concepts of difference. And the second thing is that we have our cosmologists, go into our cosmologists, look at our worldviews and try to see how to foster, how to make bring African logic to the fore so that we can help converse and cross-fertilize and enrich other logical systems across the globe. So this means that there is the need for dialogue. There's the need for intercultural discourse, the need for intercultural exchanges. And I think this conversation is one of those ways to bring African logic to the fore. And then I think there is need to avoid hegemony. You realize that when I see a project like this, when I see UNESCO bringing up such a project on World UNESCO Day for Logic, I think it is a way of putting across the message that the West has been the center of logical articulations, the West, African other traditions. And last but not the least, I think if we end up with just conversations, we want to become specialist philosophers, we want to become thinkers who just converse and dialogue. Another new orientation that we can bring from Africa is our practical logic into a practical logic and how it helps us to solve our existential and relational problems day in, day out. And so I think from this point of view, I think this initiative is going to be a wonderful one. So thank you, dear colleagues. I think I've been indicated that I've just been told that it's time. My 10 minutes are off. I think I'll come back to you during the discussions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Pius, for your general overview about the relationship between logic, philosophy, knowledge, and perspectives on interculturality generally. We are going to come back to you and the general floor after our third speaker will have addressed us on the question how logic inform African affairs or method. So we're going to listen to Dr. Miriam Alike from the University of, from Nnamdi Azikiwe, Department of Philosophy, Nnamdi Azikiwe University. Dr. Miriam did her PhD in the same university, and she is also teaching at Nnamdi Azikiwe University with a focus on metaphysics and feminist philosophy. Dr. Alike. She was here. Dr. Alike, unmute your mic.
No, I am asking who shared the screen, and the person should just remove it, so we could see faces of people. Just go up, you see where it is written stop. Then when you stop it, it will go out. Very well. Miriam, your audio is jerky.
I think maybe we continue with when Miriam fixes her audio, maybe she'll join us back, I think.
It's still there, but her audio is problematic and the environment is also dark. If she just open the window a little, so we can see her face clearly and then her audio.
I've already informed her, but if her audio cannot continue, then let's go to the general conversations and maybe return to her if her audio becomes better.
Victor, can we continue?
Yeah, that's something. Have you? Okay. Dr. Pius.
Yes.
Okay, because there is, I think the first shot is on you, and for you generally. Dr. Arabia, I think Arabia asked a question from Arabia. If you're there, maybe you ask your question because I saw your question on the. Arabia, are you with us? Well, Dr. Pius, Arabia is asking you to situate intercultural philosophy. He's making that for you to situate intercultural philosophy within the context of logic. What's the relationship? Where do logic comes in within the flow of intercultural philosophy?
Yes, thank you, Arabia. Thank you. It's been pretty long. We have not met. We're not able to communicate because of too much work and the difficulties out here. Basically, intercultural philosophy tries to bring all philosophical traditions across the globe into conversation. And one of those ways, one of those models in our conversation is basically through logic. So logic is a method, logic is a discourse in itself. And so logic comes around with intercultural philosophy. Logic is part and parcel of intercultural philosophy. Like I mentioned in my preliminary discourse, Western hegemony, racism, and racist prejudices kind of pushed or marginalized Africa and other non-Western cultures from philosophy. So within our discourse, within the framework of intercultural philosophy, we have the possibility of bringing these logic traditions, bringing forth these different philosophical traditions on board. And like I mentioned, we cannot just leave out our logic on just conversations. I'm one of the forebearers of conversational thinking in this country, in Cameroon today. But I think we should not just limit it to, abstract professional thinking by scholars, but even look at how the normal African is able to use his logic to solve his daily problems. Because Arabia, one thing is certain today with globalization and our interconnectedness, we share lots of commonalities. We move, we meet other people, we dance in clubs, we play football. And so when we meet, it is crystal clear that we have problems, we need to interact, we need to discuss. So how does the African go about his daily life? How does the African apply logical concepts to his life? How does the African try to solve problems in his daily life? So we need our logic. We need our logic as a basis to solve these problems. Thank you. Okay, I'm seeing a question from Emmanuel as well. Emmanuel, what did you just say? What are the implications? Hello, Victor.
Right.
What are these?
Can I talk?
Yeah.
Yes, Emmanuel.
Yes, please. All right then. Thank you, Dr. Pius Posima. For your very short and these are the main ingredients of intercultural philosophy, and the fact that there are pre-colonial Africans have been passed as people without logic and cannot develop that. I think you need to take a look at Momo, because the late Campbell Shitu Momo says that it's important to make a distinction between natural logic and artificial logic. That at a point in the discussion and in the discourse whether or not there is African logic, he says that the real problem is putting signs. Artificial logic, which involves using sign, the horseshoe, the dot, negation sign, that is what is lacking. But that natural logic is something that is peculiar to everybody. So now, within the framework of your intercultural philosophy, how do you think you can situate Momo's arguments that distinguishes between natural logic and artificial logic? Hello,
Hello, Emmanuel.
That? Did you hear me, Dr. Pius?
Yes, you talked of Campbell Momo and his distinction between natural and artificial logic. I
Yes,
think so.
please. Yeah. Now,
yes,
how do you situate that?
Effectively, that is what, and that is why we are postulating, we are positing that intercultural philosophy takes central stage as far as philosophy is concerned today. Because if you look at the background I gave about racism, Western hegemony, etc., the African was seen as the other who does not have those conceptual skills, who does not have those tools for doing real philosophy. So the natural and the artificial just falls within the framework of these alternative systems of logic that we need to patiently study, like what Jonathan has done with his Ezumezo logic, and that what both of us in the Conversational School of Philosophy are doing. I understand that logic is found in our day-to-day life. Logic is the air we breathe. Logic is what we eat. In everything we do, there is some logic in it. So what you are saying is quite true, you know. But the point is, in intercultural philosophy, we try to dig out those things that are hidden. We try to dig out those elements of logic in our systems that have been submerged by the global north, thinking that the global south cannot produce anything. I think the contribution by Campbell Momo is noted, and I think it gives us the opportunity to dig further into our indigenous traditions and make it systematic. Don't forget, Emmanuel, that one of the major problems one of the major problems that Professor Huntonji highlighted, and Marcientoa, Ibusi Bulaga, and the rest highlighted against ethno-philosophy was that they were not able to build up these potentials in Africa. They were not able to systematize and make these logical systems of thought, they were not able to universalize it. And so that is the challenge that we are that we must undertake in the Conversational School of Philosophy. I think basically that's what we do as far as intercultural philosophy is concerned. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Pius Musima. On a general note, I think we have to also remember that we are having a conversation, actually. Musima, Miriam, and Jolene were supposed to raise the questions, and we now start addressing these questions as a family or a group meeting under a kind of an African space or an African tree of knowledge. So we are actually sitting down under the tree or the family of knowledge to have discussions about reason, public reason, polylogism. Dr. Christina, want to make some comments on duality and dualism?
Yeah, but shortly before I make a comment on that, I want to ask Pius whether he read this work from Leo Igwe. He wrote on witchcraft. And in that witchcraft, he talked about a kind of a logical system that exists between the accused and the accuser. Okay, so where the accused says, I didn't do it, and the accuser says, you did it. So he tried to work out what kind of discussion, how does that go through? So when you say logic is something we use every day, of course, but the systematization of faith is what I will understand as this more academic, elitist way of understanding logic. And our job as African philosophers here in this forum is to see, and I think that is what Chimakonam tried to do in Ezumezu logic. How do we systematize this everyday way of thinking? I want to tell you, when I was in the secondary school, I don't use normal math formula to do mathematics. And my teachers were having very, very big problem with me. But at the end of the day, I will get the same answer. If my other students will use 30 minutes to do the mathematics, I will use 2 minutes to do it. And I will get the answer too. I wasn't just working something abstract, but it's something that works with my brain. And I have to give reason for everything I did. So the teachers were like, they were like kind of worried. I have a sister here. She studied pharmacy here. And when they go into the lab to do practicals, people will spend 7 days trying to do something. She will spend 2 hours doing the same thing they would spend 7 days to do. And she will come out with a pure answer that is completely okay within a shortest time. And they were not able to understand how she does it. And I asked myself, what is the logic behind that? And that brings me now to the comment I want to make about reason. Now, we always play into this whole Western idealization of reason. Unfortunately, my doctoral dissertation is on reason. So reason as rationality, that means rationalizing something, trying to make something intelligible, so trying to make something to have meaning, or reason as an explanation of something, or reason as justification of something, or reason as a causative, as something that is causative. Within these 4 categories of reason, you cannot separate it from emotion. Because if I am fighting for justice, and I think justice is something that I should fight, it first of all rises from my passion to fight for it. And that passion anchors on my reason, my justification of it. Now, and when we talk about objectivity is the ability to make another person, make something intelligible to another person. That is how I look at universality, or what we call universal. Something becomes universal when somebody else can understand, can make intelligible that which you want to say. The whole thing I want to comment on how we approach some of these things is when you talk about interculturality. Interculturality means that the mind that thinks, that's the mind that produces a particular system of thought, is also a mind that is shaped culturally. Is a mind that is emerging from a particular culture. So a child, you born 2 different places, 2 different families. You ask them a question. The way they approach that question depends on how their own developmental, how their thoughts have developed over time. So here, whether Hume or Kant, people who never went out of their house for 1 day, made a comment. For me, those comments is already outdated. It's already outdated because they are not, for the fact they said that, has even showed how myopic and how, to say, how narrow their world were. So let's not always focus on those things. I think I love what Joy did in trying to actually go straight into what she thought. And that is what we should be doing, to get into our own thinking. to get into our own thoughts. How those conversations interact with other non-Western or Western thinking is something that we also incorporate, and that is what is in culturality. How we also integrate, not comparison. It is not a comparative studies. Interculturality is not complementary studies. Interculturality means how you have to have a diverse view of a particular idea to be able to know that you are where you are standing is just a perspective. And that's just the quick comment I want to make. Maybe at the end I will still make a comment on illogicality and others. Victor.
Dr. Christina. Arabia, are you still there? Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
I've been appearing like a ghost.
Yes. So I listened to Dr. Pius's response to my question. And I think the problem is I don't think my question was well articulated for him. So I'll just articulate it myself. So I'm asking Dr. Pius and maybe the panelists generally, whether situating African logic within the sphere of intercultural philosophy sorts of undermine African logic by regaling it with the mantle of the other, making the discourse on African logic about how certain systems of logic are different or similar amongst themselves, and not a conversation with the various ideas within African logic aimed at interrogating new ideas, presenting new ideas, and generally moving the logic forward. So does situating African logic within the sphere of intercultural philosophy undermine it? Because we don't situate Western logic within the sphere of intercultural philosophy the way or rather Westerners do not do so the way we like to do so with African philosophy. So that's my question.
All right, Dr. Pius, we'll come back to you. Let's take again another more comment on that. I think Dr. Fabian has a question or a comment too. Could you please come up with your question, please, Dr. Fabian? Your mic is muted. All right, Pius, Dr. Pius, okay.
Yes.
Okay, I think Fabian is now.
Yes, yes. Thank you. I got Sister very well. Sister made some interesting comments there, and I think I will take them seriously. And I want to highlight that the cultural intercultural philosophy, you know,
Essaye de m'expliquer la non-distinction entre les activités ponctuelles et les activités pédagogiques.
It's deliberate. It looks, they are all very, very relevant. So I think sister's comment, sister's conclusion. Okay, somebody else. Hello? Hello? Can we converse? Yes, can we converse?
Pius, you can go on. I can hear you.
Okay. Yes, like I was mentioning before the interruption, that sister has made some very pertinent comments about locating culture, locating the idea of culture in intercultural philosophy, and I think it's very, very fundamental. That is one of our objectives, because you remember, if we look at what the global north thought about the global south, it was like the Africans were unproductive; they could not do anything for themselves. Now, Arabia's question is very fundamental. It's very important. It's core in as far as intercultural philosophy is concerned. I must state that in intercultural philosophy, we do not focus on just comparing, trying to get the similarities and differences between different cultural orientations, but we try to forge them. We try to bring them together. We try to bring them in conversation, like what Jonathan does. We try to make them sit on the same footing. The North, the Western mind would think the African mind is inferior. But today, if you look at the limits of modern science, you realize that we need lots of alternative logics as far as that is concerned. Today, if you look at what people in the West are suffering because of modernism, you look at problems that have touched, especially like depression, you realize that the African logic of I am because you are, since you are, therefore I am, is very pertinent as far as solving this problem is concerned. You do not need to, you just need to bring up this concept, making people live in community, this communitarian life. That's where you find, that African logic as it obtains. So these comments you have made, I think, are very important. And Arabia, I would like to mention finally that it is much easier to identify the relevance of intercultural philosophy, especially from the African perspective, based on our traditional practices. As far as knowledge production is concerned, we are still at the we are still at the prime. We are still beginning. We are trying to meet up with the conversation. But as far as healing is concerned, as far as African dance is concerned, as far as African rituals are concerned, they are very, very, very important. And so it is time for us. This is just a call, an invitation, and a challenge for us to go back and try to find out these practices, these belief systems that we had in our indigenous livelihoods, and bring them to the fore so that they can contribute in helping the rest of the world. Remember, today, African traditional medicine is also very influential in that domain. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pius. And Dr. Miriam, are you ready now? Dr. Miriam Alike, unmute your mic. Are you ready for your presentation? Hello, Dr. Miriam. Yeah, we can still hear you. Your audio is still very poor. Dr. Fabian, maybe I think you can make your comments now. Thank you. Hi, welcome.
Greetings to the health. I am not a doctor. Please, I don't want to be an imposter here, but I'm just a keen observer of the philosophical issue. My issue here is mindful of the issues that have always been tackled with African philosophy or reasoning in the African sphere. We realize that there are certain limitations which are always being projected. Are these limitations mostly appreciated from the Western perspective, or they are inherent in the African thought system? And if so, if they're inherent in the African thought system, what can this conversational school of philosophy suggest as a way out so as to remedy these limitations in order to better the thought pattern, in order to better the place of logic, which is natural, like Sister rightly said, as opposed to the artificial logic? That is basically what I want to, how can we better these limitations, which are somehow inherent in our natural logic, so as to let them transcend and then find itself in the natural, in the universal sphere, so as to be able to, not some sort of competing, because we are not doing complementary logic here, like Sister Riley said, but taking itself adequately with logic in the universal sphere. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for your comment. Maybe I'll quickly respond to that from the conversational point of view. Just 2015, there was actually a debate on Confluence, Journal of Intercultural and Comparative Philosophy. The debate was between, I think, Jonathan Chimakonam and Ahmed Bruce Jones. And that debate focuses on the place and space of philosophy. And when that discussion was going on, I think yesterday I was discussing with some friends, we were not aware, I don't think the discussants were aware that in 2020, we are going to be having a conference of African philosophy and other discussions on space. So if we can now discuss on space from different places, then I think the reality, the conceptual reality of African mood of thinking, of African logic, of African polylogism, which has to do with relativity and connectivity. I think this is what we really need to emphasize, relativity and connectivity, that we are interconnecting from different places. And this interconnection can be harmful or useful depending on the interconnecting persons. People are using the interconnections for evil, the good ones are using it for good. So the problem that begins to move back to the main discussions on how could this better the affairs of Africans? And I think that's the discussion which Miriam would have raised, but since we're having problem with her audio, what we need to start discussing now, having addressed the issue of reason as a natural thing, that no one has butter in his brain, in his head, or in his faculty. In fact, I don't think this is why we talk about faculties in the university, that we have faculties. So how can these faculties begin to help in the development of the kind of leaders, the kind of thinkers, the kind of readers, the kind of scholars Africa needs in the 21st century? We are talking of the vision now. So I think Pius and anyone who wants to make contributions, this is the fair of reason now, the fair of how can we now begin to project these ideas? How can we start introducing these ideas into the curriculum? How do we push it forward to help transform the type of leadership we need, Africa needs, and the world needs in the 21st century? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much.
Okay, Pius, you can make more comments, questions. I'll continue. Joylyn, are you still in the house? Joylyn?
Joy is still there.
Yeah, because there's a question.
Yes, I'm still in, Victor.
Okay. There is a question from Ufasia, Emmanuel Ufasia, that is a question to you. Ufasia, will you repeat your question directly to her for her to make her response?
All right. Hello, Joyling. Good afternoon from Lagos.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Good afternoon. Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm sure you have read Joma's harmonious monism, aware with some of the problems that names which Jonathan Chima Konam highlighted, which I'm sure you did not, or you perhaps you overlooked, is that the logic advocated by Ijoma is culture bound. It is not applicable in climes non-African. Now, the second problem is that Chris Ijoma complained about the traditional laws of thought, yet he did not prefer alternative laws of thoughts to undergird his harmonious monism. You see, now, if you are taking in 2020 Ijoma's work to look at the connection between reason and other extreme factors and binaries, do you think that Ezumezu logic would not have been better than Ijoma's harmonious monism, owing to the problems encountered by harmonious monism? Do you understand?
Yes, yes. Maybe just to respond to that, this was more or less like a topic that was assigned that I was supposed to look at harmonious monism. Actually, not they chose it, was to look at how this particular topic.
Your network is.
Did I manage to answer you? Yeah.
Yeah, let me comment on that. I think the network is right there. Ofasia, of course, Ofasia is asking, he's playing the game he always play, which is normal in philosophy. And that is the game of being a spoiler. And I think that's what I really love about the space, because the space allows us to, I think harmonious monism and what is about here is that individuals is the ability for individuals who are conversing from different places to acknowledge each other. And the idea of acknowledging each other here is to have mutual respect for each other. And Ijoma, having finished his program in the US before coming back again, was not interested in the discussion of who is more rational than the other, because he was convinced that he was rational. So he was more interested in the question of, since both of us are rational, how can we now interact together? And just like Pius said in the other discussion, he was interested in that, look, Africans have certain belief systems, cultural belief systems, which another person cannot really understand unless you look at it from that African perspective. And in that sense, this is what we are really doing now, trying to look at the world from different places. Sister is far away in the global north, but even if you come to the global north where she is actually far away from where I am, because I see myself as being in the post-colonial city, sort of. She is in a very colonial an institution too. so, you see, we begin to see the South go to places, for instance, Pius is already in the central of Africa there, and will always want us to relate with his own challenges of what is happening in Cameroon. If you come back to Nigeria, some of us who are in the north, some are in the south, some are in the east, some are in the west. So we are actually beginning to have this kind of discussions. Pius, do you have any comment to make on this again?
Do we try to see whether Miriam can the audio is good now? Miriam, how are you there? Is your audio better? Put on your audio. We're still having problems there. And Gideon is also with hands up. Can you know what he wants to say?
Gideon, you can go on. After that, we take from Nelson.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I must have to thank the panelists and those who have discussed the issue in question. I just want to make a few comments concerning what Victor asked on the issue of how do we systematize the system of African logic into Nigerian curriculum, African curriculum, to solve the problem of saying probably is African, because of we talk about African logic, everything we're doing is all about African. I want to point out something here. Just like we have in the political system of Nigeria as the point, or as a matter of fact, and then across Africans, the major challenges we are having, whatever it has to do with developing a theory or a system, is not just the fact that the system being developed is not good, but the problem now is who is the one pushing the idea? Who is developing the idea? There is always this mentality of if I'm not the one pushing it, of course everything about it is not right. Without even seeing what is in it. Because I've come to appreciate the fact that African logic have come to stay. When we argue all these things, we end up trying to say, what is the system? As at this point in time, we should be thinking on, if I am criticizing this system, what am I bringing to the table? What is my own personal contribution for or against it? It's no longer the case that this person is talking about, theorizing about the system that is not working. If you go to most of the things we discuss in most of our platforms, WhatsApp, Telegram, the argument that people raise against the existence or the possibility of African logic is no longer whether it is existing or not. What I'm not saying is it because of a group of boys? I'm sorry to use this word because I've seen somebody use that particular word in one of, is it Upon Forum or something? As a group of boys that are coming together and putting ism in whatever they are trying to say, and they think that is logic, in quotes, you know? So what I'm saying in effect is for us to, whether you think African logic should not exist because of course it's already existing, or you think it should exist, what we should be working towards now is develop a system that will now show that it is actually existing, support a system that people are already developing. Somebody raised, when we go through the issue of Thomas harmonious monism, look at the work that Jonathan is doing concerning how to develop African philosophy through the works of other scholars already on this issue. Let us make, if there are some issues that ought to be corrected within what they have done, let us contribute towards correcting them. Or if we are to refute them totally, let us do that. But not saying we cannot develop already. The idea of whether it is existing or not has been conquered. So, in bringing it down, if there is a way, because of course in Africa it must have to be that way, we can try to talk to those whose name are being heard in philosophy world, especially as it has to do with Africa, how we can convince them academically to start accepting our claim. Of course, it will be part of the curriculum. Most of the universities in Southeast here, they are already inculcating the idea of African logic into what we are doing. For instance, at University, in the second semester of the final year, you do it. So it's no longer a quest. We are already developing the system. So what I'm suggesting in terms of commenting is, instead of trying to vilify it, instead of trying to say it doesn't exist, our thoughts at this point in time is to develop those systems. Enough of theories, let us go back to work. Refute the work others have done, or bring other alternatives. As for whether it exists or not, I think that is a done deal, because even trying to say it doesn't exist, in other words, try to concretize the fact that it is existing. So let us, all of us, try and show how to develop this system. Thank you.
Mr. Gideon, for your contribution. Amobi Nelson, if you are still here, you have some contribution you make, which I think you should share for us to hear you generally. Nelson? If Nelson is not, Nelson, are you still with us? Okay. Fabian, you can do that.
I have an issue when it comes to logic in the African sphere. Like Dr. Pius said, intercultural discourse. My issue is we are struggling to discuss this in alien languages. Sorry for using this biased, racist terminology. Because I believe that if we were to see to it that we promote the African languages so that they take a central stage in the academia, this debate will stop. It will find a natural solution to it. So the trouble is, let's see how we can push it further in such a way that the curricula takes care of the African languages, transform them, and we'll realize that the issue of African logic will go without saying that it exists necessarily, and we don't even need to be debating about that again. Thank you. That's just a simple contribution I wanted to put forward.
Okay. All right, sister, you can make your comment, then we'll still come back again and see. Sister, your mic.
It's good to talk about African languages. Okay, so but the task is once we, of course, the moment we grow in a language, our thought pattern grow with that language. There is no doubt about it. Okay, now, but we are also talking, if I talk about from Pius intercultural perspective. Okay, so you need to also, why thinking in that language, how that language of thought encounters the other language of thought. But the most challenge we have is, like a paper I presented here, the place of Igbo language in a global market economy. And it was a huge, will I say, a huge embarrassment to some of the Igbo people here, because that you can't do anything with Igbo language when it has to do with economic thing. So there's a whole lot of other factors that grows around that instance. Moreover, when researches are being funded by foreigners, when you have to go abroad for your research or for your development in the academy, then they have to also evaluate the language in which you study. So these are all the challenges. I'm not saying it is bad, but we need to see these challenges when we create such a curriculum so that students can also have the opportunity they should have, so that such offers cannot be a hindrance to their development. That's just a comment I wanted to make on that.
Okay, I think there is something also more to that to add up. I think another issue we should be really looking at is that the language issue in African philosophy is a thing of advantage rather than a disadvantage. For instance, I grew up in a community where I grew up speaking. In fact, one of the most difficult questions I have been asked in my relatively very young life is, what is your first language? For someone like Jonathan, it's very easy for him, because when he was writing his African, when I read his work on Introduction to Introducing African Science, he said that when he started schooling, he only knew how to speak one language, and that was Igbo language. For some of us, we did not have that luxury. When I started my primary school, I was speaking about 4 languages. I grew up speaking about 4 different indigenous African languages. And if you should ask me which of the language was the first, I can't really say unless I have to lie. And if you now ask me which language do I think, this is the question which Ijoma was asking. I grew up speaking these languages, and the first time I was challenged was when I started my high school, and the registrar asked me to pay a non-indigenous fee. I mean, in Nigeria, for goodness sake. And this was a site where I grew up from. And my elder brother, who took me to school that very day, paid the registration. Then the next term, he gave me the money to pay. I refused to pay. I refused to pay the non-indigenous fee. And the reason was, out of my own, innocence. And when I said, I told the registrar that her children are from Ogoja, which is a bit far from where, that her children are not from this community, and her children cannot speak the language of this community. That I grew up in this community. If I pay non-indigenous fee, her children will pay non-indigenous fee. So it becomes an issue. But why am I saying this? If we look at, and this is not peculiar to Nigeria, Ghana, all these countries, we have multiple languages. I think what we should be really looking at is to do what our forebears have done to a large extent, and which Jonathan and the rest, the present generation, are doing, is to take concepts from our languages, think about them, and move into the global arena. That in doing this, we are enriching our languages, we are enriching our thoughts. So I don't really think that the language problem in African philosophy is the problem of logic. For me, I think it is more or less the problem of understanding, self-understanding ourselves first before moving to understand each other. When someone does not understand himself very well, then it might become difficult understanding the other. That's my own thing. Maybe we'll have more comment on this. I don't know if Nelson is already online again, because he asked some questions on this. I don't know, Jonathan, if you have something to make, because this is also a central place where you have contributed a lot. You can also make some comments on the question of language, logic, and philosophy generally.
Okay, thank you very much, Victor, and everyone who has been able to join us from different parts of the world. I hope you can all hear me. Can you all hear me? Someone tell me yes, so that I can proceed.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. I want to, yeah, Pius, I can see your hand. I want to appreciate those who have spoken before me, Dr. Joy Lingwara, Dr. Pius Mosima, and of course, Dr. Miriam Alike, who I believe are the panelists. Fortunately, the network couldn't allow Miriam to make her very invaluable contributions. Okay, so thank you, Pius, thank you, Joylene, for that wonderful approach of trying to apply Joma's harmonious monism on gender discourse and related matters. Quite insightful. I hope we can engage more with that. Coming back to the question about logic and language, it's really a kindred question, connecting a lot of things. Perhaps one way for us to understand or have some form of clarity regarding that would be to think of logic as fundamentally collecting principles of intelligibility. The reason why we can communicate and understand ourselves is because somehow we are all adepts to some level to the logic grounding the language of our communication. All right? Where we cannot communicate, logic is a cupboard. And that is what is meant by many people when they talk about logic as being central to human thinking, to human thought. It's foundational to thought. There is literally nothing we can do without logic as far as knowledge edifice is concerned. All right? So, and this connects well with language. Most importantly, every language in this world has not only its semantic principles, but its own syntactic rules. And these rules respond or submit to what has, what is popularly described as the laws of thought. Laws of thought, not principles of thought, but laws, in the sense that they are ultimate. Okay, even though some logicians and philosophers have challenged the impregnability of the laws of thought, and I am talking about the likes of George Hegel himself, and much more recently in the 20th century, Connor and the rest of them, even Karl Marx, they've all challenged the impregnability of the laws of thought. But what they have not been able to do is to completely undermine it. No. To different degrees, some of them are correct in suggesting that there could be other laws of thought added to the three basic ones that Aristotle articulated in the 3rd century BC. And so when we talk about language, it doesn't matter which language is that, English, Danish, German, Igbo, Zulu, Ndebele, what have you, they all submit their syntactic and semantic components, and principles submit to the laws of thought. All right? And that is why people who speak and understand the same language can understand themselves, can communicate and understand themselves. If, for example, we say come in English means draw near, and another English speaker understands that word to mean draw near, all right, then it is not the case that come could mean go away from here. All right, and in this you're moving from the law of identity to law of contradiction, and then to law of excluded middle. Okay, so but in the sphere of African philosophy and even African logic, all right, someone raises a question, I think it was Fabian, who draws our attention to the fact of doing African philosophy and even logic in alien languages. And then we still predicate them with African, all right? He thinks there's a lot of pretense involved in that. We cannot lose sight of the challenges of our colonial history, okay? Why is it that all colonialist nations, one of the foremost things they attempted doing, and they spent a lot of resources to do, was to ensure that the local people abandon their own language and imbibe the language of the colonialists. Because once you are conquered linguistically, you are definitely, you will completely remain a subject of the conqueror, okay? And that these are part of the ideas that decolonialists are fighting against, trying to draw our attention to it. But look at it from another perspective. How is it really our fault, so to speak, that we now communicate, even educate our children, formulate our curriculum using foreign languages? How is it our fault? I mean, the present generation. It is no fault of ours. Okay, but what about the past generation? It's easy to place the fault on their feet. Where were you? Why did you allow colonialists? Why did you allow these people to impose their frame of thinking on you, to the point that it becomes very difficult for us to really think originally? Okay, because insofar as you think in that alien language, you inevitably, one way or the other, you find yourself being constrained to think along the principles of their logic, which undergirds that very language. Okay, and what happens eventually? You find it difficult, and I believe that most of us here have experienced that from childhood, early school age, even to the university levels. You tend to have this feeling, this internal illumination that you've got something original to say. But at that moment that you want to articulate it, it eludes you, because at that moment you have switched. You've moved from your natural language to a colonial language to articulate that. And it becomes very difficult for you, because you find yourself using the concepts that are there in the literature already, generated in that language. You find yourself using those concepts. You find yourself applying those principles. You find yourself quoting those who have come from that culture and who are the owners of that language. So at the end of the day, it becomes difficult to really distinguish what you have said, that is truly yours, and what you have, and how you have repeated some of those people. Okay, so this is a big challenge, but what can we do with the little we have? There is something we can do. We can hands off and surrender and go home. That is no fault of ours. Things have gotten way beyond line, and there's nothing we can do. That's not correct. There's something we can do. And that is what African philosophers of the new era, those who have come to become the foundation heads of the conversational way of thinking. And I am talking about the likes of Pantaleon Irebu of blessed memory, okay, who formulated the theory of Uwa ontology, all right, and Innocent Asuzu, who also formulated the theory of Igbo and Ndanda philosophy. Listen, look at the nomenclature of those theories. Uwa ontology. The concept of Uwa was taken from the Igbo language, Igbo and Ndanda ontology. Igbo and Ndanda, again, taken from an African language, and then paired with a foreign concept that is already well-known, philosophy and ontology. Okay? Now, when you think from the perspective of African conceptual framework, that is when it becomes possible for you to think originally. All right? If you're not doing that, you might think you're thinking originally, but it's always easy for someone to draw your attention to the fact that A, B, C, and D have said so using these same concepts. All right? And those are the challenges. So we have the responsibility to go the path that Pantaleon Irebu and Innocent Asuzu have charted. And that is what you also find in my work, even though I've gone ahead to really do a lot of meta-philosophical unbundling of that approach. All right? Why is it necessary that we should articulate our concepts in different African languages, even though we go ahead to explain them, even though we go ahead to explicate them and discuss them using those alien languages? All right, but why is it important that we articulate those concepts using in African languages? Because concepts are the building blocks of thoughts. Concepts are the most important ingredients of philosophy. Okay, the two French philosophers, I'm talking of Deleuze and Guattari, defines philosophy as pure concepts. Okay, as engagement in pure concepts. That's what it is. Concepts are like placeholders. They're like a bucket. You can fill a bucket with water, you can fill it with sand. Concepts can contain more than their sizes. In one concept, you can stuff dozens of ideas in one concept, okay? And concepts contain ideas. Those are the original ideas, original thoughts that we are looking for. And until we start producing original ideas and original thoughts, people from different other cultures, including the West, would not take us seriously. Because whatever we do using their own languages, chances are that we are going to be entrapped in their own world, in a way of repeating what they have said. The German intercultural philosophers, I'm talking about Jürgen Engelbrecht and Heinz Kimmele, held a debate some 2 decades ago, okay, whether what African philosophers are doing are worth the while or not. And Engelbrecht ended up accusing African philosophers of transliterating their Western counterparts, all right? And Kimmele ended up accusing African philosophers of copying their Western counterparts. The question is, are African philosophers really copying and transliterating their Western counterpart? The answer is not really yes, okay? They set out to pour out what they think are fruits of their imagination. But the approach and the method they took usually undermine such efforts, that at the end of the day, they find themselves transliterating something, a subject or an idea that is already well established or discussed or folded in the West, thereby raising a big question mark over the originality and the veracity even of what they are saying. Okay, so language is key, but in language is logic, because logic underlies everything that we have to put across in terms of knowledge, and in its very many ramifications. Okay, again, one thing that I can and one individual that is also saying something very close to this is Eloku Duabu, who is also a member of the Conversational School, all right? In his very recent formulation of linguistic complementarity, all right? He unfolded an idea like this, which is really the direction that we should be going, okay? But for us to understand the importance of today's event, it took UNESCO quite a long time, but finally they did it. The very first UNESCO World Logic Day is celebrated around the world this year. Okay, and the CSP is joining to mark it. And I have listened with keen interest to the various discussions here. What I can add to all that is that logic is at the foundation of thought, all thinking. But then the politics, the cultural politics involved with the geographical demarcation between what could be termed Western logic, Asian logic, Indian logic, Chinese logic, and then African logic is something that requires further clarification. Why is it that scholars in different parts of the world are comfortable with the appellations Western logic? They are comfortable with Chinese logic, with Indian logic, but they're not comfortable with African logic. All right? As soon as you mention that, then some people will tell you about the universality and the topic neutrality of logic. Those are true, but how have they vitiated? How have they vitiated the idea of an African logic? And that is something that not too many people have been able to clarify. We must give credit, though, to the likes of the Cameroonian Merad Hebga, okay, a kinsman of one of our speakers today, Pius Musima. Hebga, as early as 1954, saw wisdom in foraying into that dimension of logic, okay, because underlying all aspects of thoughts, all aspects of knowledge, whatsoever from the humanities to the sciences, is logic. All right, it's logic. And Hebger, as early as 1954, wrote a powerful, very short, but very powerful article where he made a case and urged that African thinkers should begin to reflect about the creation of a tradition of logic that can go with the qualification of African. All right. And from his perspective, he tries to demonstrate the cultural roots of such a logic and try to show the lines of difference between such an African logic and, say, Western logic. And he was the one that drew attention to the number of values involved. And he pointed out that an African system of logic that is yet to be formulated necessarily has to be trivalent, okay? And he made some attempts to demonstrate the cultural basis for that. And then a number of persons, Leopold Senghor, of course, put across his own idea of logic from the African perspective. Again, but he was really misinterpreted and misread by many people who translated his idea of emotionality to be that sort of approach that is bereft of reason. He even responded in one of his papers to demonstrate that that was not what he meant. He was talking about reason that is mediated by passion, by emotion, as a sort of as an approach to reason that is more prevalent in different African cultures, and he was correct. All right. The challenge, however, was that he was writing in the language of the 1960s and not the much more synthetic, much more analytical language of the millennium years. And it is easy for many people who are really averse to the idea of Africa laying a very strong foundation in this regard. Such people really chose to criticize him even when they did not understand him. All right. After that, we have to mention the likes of Campbell Shitumomo, and I think somebody made mention of him here. I think it was Emmanuel Ufasa in the course of his comments. You know, Shitumomo, in his paper, The Question of Logic in African Philosophy, concluded that paper by throwing up what he calls a gauntlet to the younger African philosophers to come up with a system of African logic. All right, it has to be systematized. And when it is systematized, that is when it will become easy to derive and formulate methods, homegrown Africa-inspired methodologies. When we go in quest of knowledge, and it does not matter the discipline, we go with method, all right? And that is why the method of the scientists is different from the methods of researchers in the humanities. We are talking about quantitative and qualitative, all right? But even besides these big umbrellas of methodology, quantitative, qualitative, we now have mixed methodology, all right? Now, beneath them, we, in different ecologies of knowledge, we begin to talk about the properly fine-tuned approaches to knowledge acquisition, okay? And in philosophy, we talk about the really developed, very highly developed traditions in philosophy. And I am talking about, for example, the Western tradition, which is the most developed tradition, all right? It is so developed that it already has sub-traditions, okay? For example, the analytic sub-tradition, the continental sub-tradition, the pragmatic sub-tradition, all right? Continental found in Western Europe, analytic in Anglo-American world, pragmatic in North America, and in different other places. But other philosophical traditions are not so developed as such. So they are still talking about traditions and yet to start developing sub-traditions. But there's something I want to explain here. Each tradition of philosophy points to a particular approach to doing philosophy. And when I talk about approach, I'm talking of methodology, the continental tradition. You are talking about phenomenology and the rest of them, the analytic, you're talking about the analytic method and what have you, the linguistic analysis of the Vienna Circle and the British empiricist philosophy and what have you. Then we talk about African philosophy. What is that approach? Okay, African philosophy tradition. What is the approach? What is the methodology? And you see, many African philosophers will go and borrow analytic method, go and borrow continental method. No, these traditions are defined by different methodologies. That's what defines these approaches. Okay, and when you talk of African philosophy, what's the tradition? What's the method? What's the approach? Okay, that's the big question that ought to have been answered, ought to have been dealt with in the 1960s and 70s when the debate was regional. But those very important foundational questions were jumped and they started discussing meta philosophy. All right, how can you build a castle without a foundation? Okay, granted that castles are supposed to be in the air, why don't we take our time to fix the foundation so that the castle will not collapse? That is why in the 21st century, we find ourselves in a situation where Engelbrock and Heiskimel and a host of other Western philosophers are still contesting the viability and veracity of African philosophy. Because come to think of it, at the end of the day, Heiskimel says, you have to go so far to actually see the real African. Okay, what you see, even in their philosophy, is the imitation and copying of Western approaches in its worst forms. Those are the words of Jürgen Engelbrock. And they are correct. They are correct. It is not that we cannot entertain the idea of using analytic methods to investigate issues in African philosophy. Why not? It is possible, but it will now be a Western philosophy questioning and engaging issues in Africa. Okay, it will be a Western perspective to African philosophy. If we truly want to do philosophy, a tradition of philosophy that is called African, then we have to go down to the basis, to the roots. And we ask ourselves, what is the structure of our thought system? All right. And when we talk about thought system and modes of thought, according to different cultures, we are not saying that people from other cultures cannot learn and understand and even practice what obtains in another culture. That's not what we are saying. But we are talking about things that really remark the cultural identity, the intellectual identity of a people. And that is why in the midst of universality, the Englishman will still want to emphasize his Englishness, all right? In the midst of the clamor for universalism. And we must understand, whenever we talk about the universal outlook to knowledge, that it does not mean that there is something out there to which does not appeal to any cultural patterns. That's not what universalism is. All right. M. Cesar, in a letter he wrote to Maurice Torres, the then leader of the Communist Party in France in 1962, 63, or thereabout, challenged Maurice Torres and sent in his resignation that the universality that now remarks the Communist Party in France is a universality that discounts people from other places. All right, and that for him, true universality consists in the aggregation of different particularities. All right, that is true universality. The idea of universality that is often floated in philosophy and other intellectual climates are really the ones that tend to elevate the particularities of a given culture, this time around the global north, into the idea of the universal. But that really is their particular cultural epistemic formation. All right, for us to have our own epistemic formation that is worthy of the respect of the othernesses of this world, because we're not the only otherness. There are also otherness from our own perspective. It is for us to do the needful, all right? Get down to our cultural basis. It is not to excavate like the ethno-philosophers would do. No, that's not what we're talking about. It is to look at how we look at reality. Okay, the basic ontological framework of our culture, of our people. Yes, we know, for example, that if there's a matter between A and B, and the law of contradiction will demand that if A is saying the truth, all right, and B is saying something contrary to what A is saying, then B is not saying the truth. All right, so any attempt to really demonstrate that both of them are saying the truth would amount to a contradiction. That is law of contradiction for you. It works for us. It works for people in Japan. It works for people in any part of the world. However, these classical laws suffer cultural limitations from culture to culture. All right, and in our culture, even though it works, there is an extent that there's a certain extent, there's a point that it gets to, the Benoke point, and it will not work anymore. All right. Very often we know of two people in a dispute and we want to mediate, and A will say his part and B will say their part, and then we'll say, okay, A, you're right, B, you are right. However, what does that mean? We are coming to the middle. We are accepting the fact that there is some part of the testimony of A and B, even though they appear to contradict, that are actually true. All right? We are moving from that point, from bivalence to trivalence. We are breaking the chains of determinism, moving on to complementarism. And in reality, that is exactly what works the most. All right, we want cultures to complement. We want people to complement rather than contradict, rather than divide, rather than fight. We want people to come together. All right, and that is the perspective. That is how most people, most cultures in Africa look at things. That is the perspective. So why don't we formulate the logic that, that shows that up? All right, and people like Ijoma took the bulls by the horn to formulate harmonious monism. Innocent has formulated complementary logic. I have also added a Zumezi logic to that. But it is up to us to discuss this and see what we can contribute from different angles. Aristotle articulated what is now known as the classical logic. But since then, several thousands of Westerners have added their voice, and even many more people who are not Westerners. Okay, and we can also do that here. It is taking steps like that that will begin to really demand and deserve the respect of people of the world. We need logic, and then from which we can generate homegrown methodologies and pursue knowledge in different fields from the perspective of those homegrown methodologies. The science that we have now, the protocol of science that we have now, this cannot be the only protocol to acquire scientific knowledge. All right, but until we generate our own logic, develop it, make it better, formulate methods on the basis of those logics, we will not be able to put them to work, to reach knowledge from other perspectives, and that is the goal of decoloniality. I'd like to stop here and allow others to contribute and perhaps round off the program as the moderator and host may deem fit. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk. And thank you everyone who has been able to join us from different parts of the world. Let us continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jonathan Chuakola, for charging up the house again, as usual. Oyeko, I think you raised some questions, and I think giving you an opportunity to make your comments generally before we are already beginning to run into the extra time, if we can have any, before we go.
Yes, everybody, hello. Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me.
Yeah, but You can have
Yes. Oh, all right, all right. I'll put in the video now. Okay. It's quite interesting to listen to scholars speaking, though I came in a bit late. What I quickly just want to add to the discussion, I think I sent it earlier on to Nweke, and I was saying then that as good as it is that we have the existence of African logic cannot be questioned anymore. It's obvious now that beyond saying there is African philosophy, we can agree that there is African system of logic. I think beyond that, we should be thinking of how we can make use of these African logical principles to bear on developmental projects. For instance, how can we begin to use these African principles to validate, to rationalize African philosophical thoughts towards addressing issues like poverty, environmental crisis, issues like political instability, governance. So how can we use African logical reasoning to rationalize these African philosophy contributions? I think that is what, because I remember one of Jonathan's presentation in one of his articles on development of indigenous knowledge system, he was saying that there are enough trouble for us in Africa. We should not just be thinking of theorizing. We should find and use African logic to bridge the gap between theory and practice. So how can we push it to that level? That is just the question I'm raising. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you so much, Oyekule. I think maybe we are going to invite Dr. Joy to give us final comments in case our network is better now. Then we'll move to Mosima. And from there on, we'll know how many minutes we have left, and we'll begin to address these issues. What I take from exactly, I think this is, today is conversations generally. And everyone here is either teaching or is about to teach or is aspiring to teach either at the university level or a different level of education. But all of us here are academics and leaders of thought in the 21st century Africa. So I think these questions are things we should also take seriously. And the essence of this discussion today is actually to push everyone to start thinking, how can I make use of this my head for the betterment of Africa? So Dr. Joy, if you are around or if you can hear me, please could you make your parting statement? Or if you're not ready, maybe Pius, you start, maybe you should join. Pius, your mic is off.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jonathan, my brother. Thank you for that very good discourse, that good presentation. I think I have been absent for long due to some reasons you know very well, and I think I'm back, and we move on. And I go home. I go back to Bamenda this night. I traveled tonight to Bamenda with this notion that African logic can be very well incorporated into our quest for intercultural philosophy, which is all about dialogue and bringing people together and getting Africa center stage as far as that is concerned. I would like to salute my brother, Fabian. Fabian is a very modest person. He has been doing lots of work here in Cameroon, at the National Pedagogic Office of Philosophy, and he has faced lots of criticisms that many people don't understand, that Jonathan and the rest of the CSP team are, having, a different orientation, different perspectives as far as knowledge production is concerned. So Fabian, I think you have had a taste of what the CSP looks like. You have had a taste of what my movement is like. And I would like to show this book to Fabian. I think when I come back, I'll give you a copy of this book, Decolonization, Africanization, and the Philosophy Curriculum, edited by Edwin Etiye. And there is a very good article here by Jonathan, which I think I'll give Fabian to photocopy so that our students can read and get better as far as philosophy is concerned. So Victor, that was my concluding word. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you, my friends Ada, Agada, Miriam, and all the others in Nigeria and across the globe. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Pius. Joy, do we still have you around? All right,
yes.
sister. Okay. Wonderful. Joy, we are listening.
Oh, I'm still around, Victor. Just want to thank everyone for making this happen. I look forward to participating in more of these events, and yeah, I think that's pretty much the Thank you.
Yeah, the network again. I think the network is very poor.
Yeah, network poor today.
All right, thank you, Joylyn, for participating. Sister, you have your passing words, and I'll conclude and we'll leave.
Okay. Once again, I want to thank Pius Mosima, Joylyn, and of course, Miriam. I'm so sorry that we missed the valuable contribution you would have done here, but I'm sure that we still have opportunities to listen to you and share your ideas. So thank you very much for the presentations. Thank you, Dr. Jonathan Chimakram, the convener. And one of the points you made that really touched me is one of my experiences here. I was making a presentation and I used a German word. I was criticizing a neoliberal idea. And I was using the word, what they call self-realization, but in the German language. One of my colleagues interrupted me and said that I am using a concept in a word that I'm also criticizing. And I am a funny type. I immediately switched to Igbo and I spoke for more than 5 minutes. And they were just looking at me like I don't know how to express their look. Everyone was confused. I didn't ask them anything. I didn't say anything. I continued to talk for the next 10 minutes in Igbo language. And then suddenly somebody stopped and said, but what are you doing? I said, because I have to speak in the language in order to communicate my idea. Since using your language is very, very problematic for you, so let me use the language that will project my what my thought is all about. So I think what Jonathan said is quite correct. So when you think, these days I'm thinking in German and it's very, very dangerous for me because of course, but their language shares a lot with Igbo language. And that's why I'm able to function because I can think in both of them and see that they are not quite distant in the structure. So thank you so much for that contribution. And of course, there is a lot of concepts that came up as we are talking about. Some of these concepts are, of course, surely colonially shaped because we have to think in those colonial languages. But then that doesn't mean that the content, I always quarrel with that. That doesn't mean that the content is Western content. Just that we have to use the language to express the thoughts. But what we are trying to express is not what that is not just, it's not contained exclusively in that language. So that is also what I want to say. And to the point of what Jonathan said, I just withdrew a little bit, is when he was talking about an analytic philosophy or analytical method, okay? So long as the way our brain works, the brain works analytically. That means when I want to analyze Jonathan, of course, I will have to analyze him, but I am not just analyzing because I'm doing analytic philosophy. I'm analyzing because the way my mind functions at that point is to analyze. So that is also for me a very big issue. But finally, he used the word cognonormative epistemology in trying to say what we can do in response to what Pius said towards the end, or what also Fabia said about how we have to use the logic. I think is who made that comment, how to use this logic to address most of the problems we have in Africa. I think he proposed something he called cognonormative epistemology, where he says that it is not just an abstract knowledge, it's not just something that is cognitive, but something that has also a normative consequence, that is in terms of ethics, in terms of morality. And he also introduced something like interrogative theory. And I'm asking him here to develop that thought. Apart from one particular article where I saw that, Jonathan abandoned that theory. Jonathan, please develop that interrogative theory further. I think we will need it. Finally, Victor, thank you very much for the moderation. Thank you for the preparation. Thank you for how you distributed the ideas and for your time. All the participants, wherever you're coming from, it's my pleasure to know all of you, to meet you in this virtual space. It's for me something that is quite interesting. And thank you very much for the participation.
Right, thank you so much, Dr. Christina. Before we go, I will just say a few words again. Like first, Jonathan, if you're expecting Jonathan to develop integrated theory, sorry, you are making a mistake. He will not. The reason is because Jonathan will want to write one article. He will create more problems for us. And catching up with him has been difficult. And studying him has been quite wonderful, challenging. So I'm saying this, that if you're expecting, what you need to do is to start developing integrated theory, criticize him as difficult, as hard as you can, and he will make some response when he's writing on another paper. But going back to that, Jonathan, like every logician, I think that's why I started with that. The problem I have with logicians in general, including Ijoma, who happens to be one of our teachers, is that when they write, they forget about what they have written and continue with what they are doing. They are thinking, just like you said, from A, B, C, D, they keep going until Z when they go back to meet motherland. And that's why they always stop at Y. They keep talking about the youthfulness and strength of our life. So, sister, next time when someone tells you about analytic philosophy, tell them that Anna is the land. So you are doing analytic philosophy, you are thinking from the land, from where you are standing. Even the British,
Annie.
Even the most British person knows that mother tongue is first language. So when next time we meet, we are still going to be discussing these issues. Logic as the foundation of thought, logic as Jonathan just talked about, every concept, every word we use, which is Oku, has a lot of things you can put inside this box. And when somebody wants to bust you out of your language, try to let him know that your mother tongue is actually your tongue and you cannot do away with it. So thank you for coming and hope to meet you some other time in other forums. Thank you. All right.
Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful time.
Unmute your listing now, Ishiaki.
Bro, Safa.
I mean, it has Alpha.
I don't.
Sister,
it's just like that. At the time. Hello. I said things just like that. I can't disappear for some time. I feel meet up with some challenges.
you at least you tell person, like that person say you are switching off.
Oh, wow.
From the wall, you tell people that you are switching off. We know that you are switching off. Nobody will bother you.
Okay.
And not that you just switch off on your own. Then when somebody is even at that complaint today that you don't respond to messages, you don't respond to talk, you do it.
I'll leave that one first.
No, now. Enjoy your holiday.
So I don't land at Lagos. I see the Lagos. Maybe I will leave tomorrow.
All right. We'll talk now.
Yeah, when I reach there. Okay, now, thank you. I just leave a Fosia place, day long before meeting start. So now for road, I join the meeting.
That's good. Thanks for joining.
Yeah.
I'm expecting to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, now.
Okay, so I will sign out now. When I sign out, unless you people still want to chat, then I can leave it open. Otherwise, if I end it, everybody will just.
I don't know if anybody. You will sorry, I did not.
I want to ask, no problem. Maybe I will still talk.
Madam sister, but the network before.
Okay, then I will sign out now. I love you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.